Hear now this word from the letter to the Hebrews. We'll start in chapter 11, verse 29. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land. But when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, but she had received the spies in peace. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, and won strength out of weakness. They became mighty in war and put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection, and others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in the skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, and in caves and holes in the ground. Yet all of these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You know this story, don't you? For by faith, you thought you had the perfect job offer lined up. You'd interviewed, it'd gone beautifully well. You knew this was going to be the job for you, and yet a week later, you got the phone call that you didn't receive the position. By faith, you held on knowing that there was something out there for you, and a few months after that, something opened up that was more perfect for you and for your situation than that perfect job ever would have been. By faith, you've struggled with something. Maybe it's an addiction, maybe it's a relationship, but you have struggled with something and you continue to struggle with it. And day after day, you get up and you pray that God would help make the path smooth sailing, that there might be a way to move forward. And yet you go to bed at the end of the night and you realize that you're still struggling with the same thing you were struggling with this morning, and that your prayer tomorrow morning will be the same as it was today. By faith, some of you have packed up your 17 and 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds. You've helped them pack the car. You've packed the cars yourself. You've driven them to college, and you have unpacked them and helped them get their room set up. You've instilled in them everything good you possibly can so that they might succeed for the life ahead of them in the year to come. And yet you've still gotten into your car and by faith turned the ignition key and started to drive away, knowing that you have entrusted them with all those good things that you want them to know, and you've entrusted them to a God who loves them more than even you can imagine. You know this story. By faith, there have been a list of heroes and heroines in your life that have helped you to show you the way of faith, that have reminded you of who God is and of how God works, and sometimes of who you are in life. You could rewrite this letter to the Hebrews with your own story. By faith, all of these things have happened, and what more can you say? Because God has provided the way forward through all of these lives that have helped to change yours. You can rewrite this story. And yet, this story, this letter to the Hebrews, was written by an anonymous author to an anonymous group of Christians who were struggling. If you know much about the early church history, you know that there are early church believers who were persecuted and followed and had a hard time living into their faith because of the situation in the world around them. By faith, they clung to the notion that God would provide a way forward, and yet they often found themselves disappointed and discouraged, and they were struggling. But they knew that that was not the end of the story. If we're truthful, you and I find ourselves in that place sometimes too, don't we? We find ourselves in places where we're discouraged and where we're disappointed and where we know that there has to be something greater in life for us after that. We find ourselves in these places in life where we're searching for God to do something big, to conquer the problems of our world, and yet we still find ourselves in that spot where we're struggling and wondering exactly what's going to come next. You know, God's story of faith is not a story that can be told in a matter of years or even in our lifetime. God's story of faith is an epic story of epic proportions. It's really, really big. It started long ago. It will go far into the future. And God's got it under control. It's an epic story of epic proportions. It's bigger than you and I. Kenda Creasy-Dean, who's a youth ministry author and writes a lot about the youth and our culture and young adults, is also a professor. She shared with us once as a group of clergy that one of the things she thinks is so appealing to our young people about some of the things of our culture is that they are yearning deep inside for an epic win in life. You're yearning deep inside to see a problem in the world around us, to find a way to meet that problem and to conquer it almost immediately. That's why they're drawn to things like video games or games on their phones. I have to admit, I'm drawn to some of those too. And so are you. You can deal with something that for this moment you know you can handle the problem in front of you. And in an hour or maybe even 5 minutes, you can master whatever it is and move on to something else. It's that deep yearning inside each of us for an epic win in life. And it impacts our faith journey. You see, if we're going to talk about God's story being an epic story of faith, of epic proportions, then it's not a fairy tale full of happy endings. And it's not even a vignette or a short story that can stand totally alone. Rather, just as in this passage, there are a series of stories and a series of people that God has woven to get together to get us to God's ultimate end in life. That was the message to the Hebrews in this story. The message is that you may find yourself in a place today where you are disappointed or discouraged or struggling with something. And that if you find yourself in that place today or a month from now or a year from now, that while God doesn't desire that for you, God will use it for good. It's the place of faith in our lives, isn't it? That when we want to accomplish that epic win, when we want to see a problem and meet it, when we want to do something to make a difference, when we want to choose a career that's going to transform the life of somebody else in the way that only God can do, and we want to be a part of that, it's that story that reminds us that faith is believing something better is always possible. And when we don't succeed at what we believe could be that epic win that's right in front of us, that we have one of two choices. We can either take a look at the problems in our world, like homelessness and poverty and global disease. We can watch the news and see what's been happening in Egypt this week and think about and pray for the lives that have been lost there. We can desire in our innermost being for an epic win in any one of those situations. And when we start to realize that we don't feel like we can touch or make a dent in any of those things, we can either let go and believe that God will raise someone else up to deal with that problem and we will turn a blind eye. Or we can accept the opportunity to be a part of an epic story of epic proportions and to play one small piece and moving one step closer to God's epic win at the end. I think that's why the writer of Hebrews says this: by faith, remembering everywhere that we have been as a people of faith, let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, that guides our way, that offers us the example of what it means to hang on to hope and to joy for the epic win at the end of the story. You know, I've run a handful of 5Ks in my life, not a ton of them, but enough to have that experience of knowing what it feels like to work hard and to train hard to be able to run just 3 miles. The first one I ran was about 5 years ago, and I'd worked so hard to get to that point that my family was gathered around, but they knew they just needed to kind of give me my space till I got to the end of the race. And I lined up for the starting line, and I turned on my iPod, and I put in my earbuds, and I tuned out everything else, and when everyone started to run, I did too. And I kept going for the whole 3 miles that way, tuned out to everything around me, listening to the music, thinking to myself, and just pushing forward with the finish line in mind. And that was it. The race was in McKinney, and it was full of hills up and down and up and down and up and down, and it was challenging, to say the most. And I got to the last leg of the race, and I could see that finish line I had been focused on for so long, and what was between me and that finish line was a hill of insurmountable proportions. It was epic. But for the first time in that race, I realized that there were people lining both sides of the road where we were running, and that they were yelling words of encouragement to each one of us. I didn't know them, and they didn't know me, and truthfully, I'd seen them other places in the race, but I had those earbuds in, and I was focused on the finish line I knew was in front of me. But as I hit that insurmountable hill of epic proportion, I took out those earbuds and I slung them over my shoulder, and I started to listen to those words of encouragement, to that cloud of witnesses that had gathered around. To say, you can do it. We know you can make it to the end of the race. And it wasn't very long before tears started to stream down my face because I realized I had missed it up until that point. That moment in my life had been an opportunity to listen to the voices God had put around me, that cloud of witnesses that was encouraging me, not toward a finish line, but just encouraging me for the next few steps. And I heard those words from this passage in Hebrews that say, "Therefore we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses." And we can start to think, we're really good at listening to the voices of the world that are discouraging and disappointing and cause us to struggle. We're really good at listening to all those voices in the world that say you're not worthy or you can't do it. And when we start to hear those voices, we know there's a different message to listen to, and we plug in our spiritual earphones and we tune everything else out, and we focus on the finish line that are in front of us, and we miss the cloud of witnesses. Because what we've done in tuning out those discouraging, disappointing voices is we've tuned out the heavenly voices as well. We're really good at seeing the finish lines that we see in life. We're really good at trying to achieve the epic wins that we know we can conquer with almost immediate success. We're really good at saying, this is where I'm pointed in my career or in raising my children or in my retirement. We're really good at naming those things and at getting to that place and achieving an epic win for ourselves. But when we do that, we miss the fact that life was never about that one particular finish line anyway. Life was about an epic journey of faith that began before us and will continue after us, and for this period of time has been entrusted to us, that we might see beyond our own finish lines, that we might listen to more than the discouraging voices of the world, that we might hear and see with clarity by faith the story of faith that has been entrusted to us from a long time ago, of people who have been discouraged and disappointed and yet stuck with it because they knew God was taking them somewhere. We can go through life with our spiritual earphones in, not paying attention to that message from God. We can go through life seeking the epic wins that we yearn for. Or we can go through life with faith, knowing that we're a part of an epic story of faith that doesn't belong to us and never has, but belongs to a God who loves us enough to put us smack dab in the middle of it and to give us the opportunity to do one small thing that helps further the journey. Amen.